Breaking news just into the newsroom. A new photo of quadruple murderer Bryan Kohberger released minutes ago. This photo comes to us from ABC correspondent Kana Whitworth. She shared on X tonight the photo, writing, "New picture of now convicted killer Bryan Kohberger in the moments after his arrest."
If the world had known what we know now, there would never have been a Bryan Kohberger plea deal.
The mystery of the Idaho murders continues. How did roommates Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk miraculously survive?
Hollow, empty, heartless psychopath Bryan Kohberger actually passed Dylan Mortensen on his way out of the crime scene. It was at such close quarters that the 19-year-old was able to see just how tall the 28-year-old man was. You know, that he was athletic but not muscular, saw that he had a big nose, bushy eyebrows, and that he was carrying something in his hands. He was also walking and not running. This means he could easily have deviated or even continued walking towards her, since the route to the sliding door was, for a short time, in the direction of Dylan's door, Dylan's room, and Dylan herself.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Put up your hand if you think he simply didn't see her. In a poll posted recently asking whether Kohberger saw Dylan, I was astonished to see the answers split virtually down the middle.
Dylan peeked out of her bedroom and observed a male, described as approximately 6 feet tall, slim build, with a black ski mask, leave the second floor patio area. Prosecutor Bill Thompson tells the Idaho Statesman July 30th, "From what Dylan described, I have a hard time imagining that the killer did not see Dylan."
I have a hard time imagining that as well. And so this suggests that around half the folks following this case, certainly in terms of the poll, have a totally skewed idea of Kohberger and also the events that actually happened. It is interesting and a tad troubling that after 3 years of analyzing this crime, folks are still split down the middle. And have a look at this comment. I find it so interesting how people are nearly split down the middle answering your question. And I think I know why. If Kohberger saw Dylan, he would have killed her because he's a psychopath. Raise your hand if that's how you're reasoning. Now let's have a look at some of the reasoning that's out there. PT Thompson 694 says, he killed everyone he saw. I don't think he saw her. But you do know the literature records him seeing her. It's in the police statements. Little Black Kitty Art writes the following. I don't think most people understand just how difficult it is to stab a human being, especially one fighting back. Dozens of times. A knife attack is nothing like shooting someone. Death is far from instant, and the panicked victim is responding, is fighting back as intensely as they can, fighting for their lives. In this case, the killer has to act extremely quickly to prevent others in the house from being alerted. Remember, all of them have their phones close at hand, but he also has to prevent the victims from screaming out and alerting the neighborhood. I've been to the house and it's literally surrounded by other houses, and we know that nearby cameras did pick up the sounds coming from that house. But think about it. In the reality of this case, Kohberger was inside the home for 15 minutes. Think how long 1 minute is to be in someone else's house when you're sort of broken in. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. This was 15 minutes. And so I really do agree with this comment. He was exhausted, didn't expect he would be stabbing 4 people to death within 15 minutes, and he was trying to get out of the house. Now, I think a lot of people want to believe that he was trying to kill as many people as possible, something like Elliot Rodger. I don't believe that is the case. I believe his target was specific and more likely one person. And have another listen to what the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, his thoughts on why Dylan Mortensen was spared.
As to why she was left unharmed, Bill says, at that point, he'd been in the house probably longer than he planned, and he had killed more people than he had planned.
Do you remember in the early days, before we knew much about the crime, there was this idea that he was a serial killer and that he had purposefully, deliberately killed 4 people, and it was this perfect crime. Of course, at that point, there wasn't any knowledge that someone had actually seen him, Dylan, or that he'd left a knife sheath at the scene of the crime, or that his DNA was on the knife sheath. At that point, we also didn't know about his connection or lack of to the victims. We also didn't know that Kaylee was in the same bed as Maddie, and she wasn't actually supposed to be there that night. And so if you remember, in the absence of all this context, people were adamant, they were so sure that we were dealing with a serial killer, a psychopath, and unfortunately all of those speculations did resonate with a lot of people, and still a lot of those people seem to believe this today. Are you one of them? Isn't it time to perhaps update your knowledge of this case, your insight into what really happened in this case? And how do you do that? Well, use your imagination. Try and picture what we are dealing with here. If you imagine the reality of that someone is inside someone else's house murdering for 15 minutes while someone else is present, that is an eternity, especially if they are awake and sober. Luckily for him, Dylan was not only asleep but inebriated at the time of these attacks. Mortensen told law enforcement officers that she had been drunk and struggling to determine what was real and what was a dream. Remember, all of this happened past 4 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Another interesting area is, did Bethany wake up and call her, or did Dylan actually wake up first? We actually don't know. Bethany can't remember. But it sounds like Dylan overheard a lot of noise, got up repeatedly to figure out in her fuzzy state what had happened, and it was probably Dylan who called Bethany rather than the other way around. It's also interesting that in her statement, Bethany says Dylan made eye contact with the killer, and yet Dylan's statement to Officer Brett Payne actually doesn't say that. So it's not clear what Dylan actually saw, but I do think it's clear that she saw Kohberger at very close quarters, probably less than 2 meters. And I personally think black-eyed, bug-eyed Kohberger did see Dylan. So I agree with Bronx Tales True Crime, who left the comment, she said they made eye contact, he did see her. I also think Bethany not remembering if she called Dylan gives you an idea of how hard it can be to remember specifics when you are woken up by something and in a panic, very late at night. It ought to be easy to clarify the answer to this, who called whom, just by examining the phone records. According to the responding officer, it was obvious an intense struggle had occurred, and as far as we know, Kohberger inflicted a total of 80 injuries on just 2 of the victims. There definitely was a scuffle upstairs. That is how he lost the knife sheath. So yes, he was exhausted. BZ Mamas 3162 writes, he was exhausted at that point, but I don't believe he saw her. Had he, I believe she wouldn't be here. Interestingly, although Kohberger left the area in his vehicle at a high rate of speed, he didn't leave the residence at a high rate of speed. He walked out, and according to the statement, walked past Dylan. Let's go to that statement right now. Dylan stated she opened her door for the 3rd time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. Dylan described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past Dylan as she stood in a frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the black sliding glass door. Now, the reason many believe Dylan wasn't killed is because if Kohberger was a cold-blooded, deadly assassin, he would have easily killed her, but he simply didn't see her. Once again, this isn't reality. It's someone filling in the blank as they see it, not as it actually is. I agree with the prosecutor. Kohberger's perfect crime had turned into an absolute mess. It killed far more people than he expected, had spent far more time at the crime scene as well, and when he left, even though he was seen, he was so scared, so spooked, he just wanted to get out of there. But I understand that the so scared, so spooked, he just wanted to get out of there narrative doesn't jibe with some people, because many in the media have created this false impression of Kohberger as a cool, calculated, cold-blooded, psychopathic serial killer. So I'm not surprised it doesn't make sense to many that he could feel scared or spooked. It's not that psychopaths don't feel anything, they just don't feel empathy. I don't think sparing a frozen, quivering Dylan had anything to do with her, had anything to do with feeling sorry for her, or having even anything against her. I think it had everything to do with craven self-preservation. Why many people don't like the scenario is that it firstly humanizes the killer, and of course he needs to be as scary as possible, as evil as possible, and as psychopathic as possible. In true crime, shock value sells, and the more grisly a crime and the more monstrous the killer, the better, the more popular the story. On this channel, we care more about reality than making money, which is one reason why it's taken over 3,000 videos to get some of the same viewership numbers other far more popular shock value channels get. That's the price, in a way, of being authentic in this space. My sense is a lot of people use the word psychopath in almost every murder and for almost every murderer without understanding what a psychopath is. Although psychopaths also experience fear, they experience it a lot less than most of us do. If Kohberger was a true blue psychopath, he would have reasoned that, despite the risk, he couldn't let a witness who actually saw him live, and would have tried to dispatch Dylan quickly as well. I mean, she was paralyzed. She probably wasn't going to offer much of a defense. You would imagine, though, that the dumbest mistake in a multiple killing like this, where the killer hoped to get away with his crimes, was to leave a witness alive, one that saw him, one that could identify him, one that could incriminate him in court, one that could convict him of his crimes. Yet that's precisely what Kohberger did do. He did allow someone who saw him to live. He ran out of his own crime scene not because he was a psychopath, but because he wasn't. People don't like the idea of a fearful Kohberger because it diminishes the monster. And true crime, virtually every creator out there is trying to feed many of you precisely what you want to hear. Just how evil, scary, and awful and subhuman Kohberger is, so that he can be completely to blame and 100% inhumane, and we can be completely innocent victims. Also, Kohberger is less shocking if he's a little more like us. That scenario is disturbing, and we'd rather not think about it. In a similar vein, those who believe Dylan is guilty of something, not being honest, hiding something, perhaps even worse, well, it provides the same fuel the most rabid in the true crime community want, which is that everything is very simple, very black and white, she's to blame, and her responses aren't human either. But what did she say? How did she respond? She said, "It's beyond anxiety. It's my body reliving everything over and over again. My nervous system never got the message that it's over, and it won't let me forget what he did to them. People call me strong. They say I'm a survivor, but they don't see what my new reality looks like. They don't see the panic attacks, the hypervigilance, the exhaustion." Essentially what she's saying is people can't see reality. She's also saying that it's essentially a failure of the imagination. In other words, it's a failure of empathy. In a real sense, what we're really seeing isn't that Kohberger is a psychopath or that Dylan is guilty of a crime. It's that a large swathe of the mob out there are psychopathic in their salivating consumption of this stuff, with absolutely zero regard for the interests of vulnerable young people, not just those associated with the funhouse, but the wider student communities in Moscow and Pullman. I've been appalled at how disinterested the mainstream media is in their trauma, kind of their collective trauma, and in protecting their interests, in protecting the greater good in terms of this vulnerable young student community, as they pursue their selfish agendas, in covering true crime. I've been doubly appalled at the many looking in on Dylan, gasping and sobbing in court without any empathy whatsoever. What we are consuming is consuming us. Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. In the next episode, we'll be looking at what psychopathy is and what the experts say about using labels. It may not sound terribly interesting, but be prepared to have your socks blown off. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining me on this Sunday. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe and keep it real, and I'll see you guys next time.